welcome. Thank you for being part of this session. I described this session this afternoon as being probably the most important presentation I do, and I spend a lot of time with municipalities. I think it's important to have the opportunity for you to have the opportunity to hear what some of the fundamentals are of local government, and also to get a sense of what it means to be elected to council and what some of the responsibilities are that go with it. Today's a special day. May 2nd is the date that the clerks are now in a position to take nominations. So you can file your papers. You should be going to your local municipality to find out exactly what's required. And the clerks will be the ones who will help you put it in place and get your name on the ballot for October. The period to put your name in it runs up until August 19th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so you have lots of time to give some thought to it. Local government is, I think, the most open and transparent level of government that we have in Ontario. And I'll show you in just a little while why I think that's the case. I get asked regularly what characteristics I look for in people who are on council or who are effective members of council. And I bring it down to two things. One is integrity, and the other is a vision for your community. And I think those two together, if you have those characteristics and you bring those to your responsibility as a member of council, you'll be very, very successful. Let me very quickly just tell you what my background is and how I got here today. I'm a lawyer who is recently retired from practice, so I don't take on individual clients anymore, but I do have the opportunity to do training with municipalities and municipal associations. I'm part of a company called Amberley Gavel, and it has been doing closed meeting investigations, and we'll talk about those a bit later, since 2008. And also we did integrity commissioner work, and I'll tell you about that as we go along as well. I was honored in 2007 by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario to be named to its honor roll. And I've been put in there as a municipal coach, and that's how I'm described. So I've had experience with larger municipalities, Scarborough and Brampton and Sudbury, but I've done a lot of work with very small, mid-sized and very small municipalities throughout the province since I left Sudbury in 2001. So let's talk about what I want to cover tonight in the material. And if you have questions, keep them till the end, and I encourage you to ask them, and we'll work our way through whatever questions do come up. The questions are important, and I want you to feel at the end of this that you've had a chance to get a sense of exactly what local government is about. So we're going to start by doing a little bit of a discussion around municipal government. I call it Municipal Government 101. This is, if we were doing this as a full course, would be anywhere from a day to several days in length. We're going to do it maybe about 7 minutes. We'll get through it. We're going to talk about municipal powers and where powers come from and who holds the powers within the municipality. And that becomes important if you're running for council, because there's some people who think that once they're elected to council, they have all the powers of the municipality, and that isn't true. But we'll explore that as we go on. The next topic I want to cover deals with accountability and transparency. As I said at the beginning, local government is the most accountable and the most transparent form of government. And I'll give you some examples how that's the case. There are a couple of reasons I get called during a term of council by a municipality that's having some difficulties. And one of those reasons revolves around the issue of who's responsible for doing what within the organization. And so we're going to spend some time talking about roles and responsibilities, who's responsible for what, and how do we know that? And we'll delve into that for a few minutes to give you a sense of what it's about. I then want to talk about some personal considerations, what it means to be elected, how your life will change, but also personal considerations around codes of conduct for members of council, conflict of interest. I'm going to talk a little bit about confidentiality. And I'm going to finish tonight giving you an example of the complexity and the technicality of local government when I talk about water and the delivery of water. So we've got a lot to cover. As I say, if you have questions, make a note of them and make sure we deal with them when I'm finished the material. One of the differences between doing this session live and doing it via Zoom or on video is that if I'm with the live audience, I will have them work with me to develop a list of what local government does. And it's a really important exercise. We're not going to be able to do it online here, but I encourage you after we're finished this to take a piece of paper and write down as many things that you can think of. And I'm going to cover a few of them as we go through this tonight. And I encourage you to do it not at the 30,000 foot level, but right at ground level. And by that, I mean, don't just write down the word roads. You should be able to break down what municipalities do around roads into a dozen or more activities that are significant on which council has to make decisions on a regular basis. So do a list. And I think it's important when you're doing the list to recognize which of those activities are regulated. In other words, where there are regulations in place that ensure that the steps have to be taken and things have to be done in a way that meets provincial legislation or sometimes federal legislation. Develop the list. One of the interesting aspects of the list, if you name libraries, for example, libraries cannot be offered by the local municipality. If council wants to have a library service in the community, it has to create a public library board. And that board will be responsible for the delivery of the library service within the community. It's called a local board. And local boards are significant in that they have this specialized responsibility. Libraries are one example of that, conservation authorities, health units, and each of those local boards are separate entities. They are separate corporations unto themselves, but they each have a different distinct relationship with the municipality. And you find that if you look at the provincial legislation that authorizes them and allows the municipality to be part of it. So take a look at some of the services. Let me give you a few 30,000 foot ones and you can give some thought to what's involved. You may want to put down recreation and probably, again, you can get a dozen or more activities that fit within recreation. Water, what goes along with water? Well, sewer and water go together. Emergency services, what fits within that? You take a look at that. Municipalities also do some pretty important things around economic development and zoning and planning. And you can break those things down and the responsibilities. So the list is well over 100 activities that municipalities are responsible for. See how far you can get on developing a list. And if you want to go on your municipal website, you'll probably find a number of activities that probably will surprise you that municipalities are involved with. So I encourage you to do that. It gives you a sense of the scope of local government. It's not just pushing snow around in winter and barking dogs in summer. It's a lot of other activities and a lot of responsibilities that go along with it. want to spend a few minutes on this because I think municipal powers are really important in terms of you getting a sense, if you want to be a candidate, what municipal powers are, where they come from, and who exercises them on behalf of the municipality. Municipalities are often said to be creatures of the province, and that concept got reinforced this last year with the City of Toronto case. You may recall back in 2018 that the province, right in the middle of the campaign, I think it was in August, for the upcoming election in October, the province reduced the size of City Council in Toronto by half. And people were outraged and litigation ensued, and it worked its way up to the Supreme Court of Canada, which at the end of the day said that the province had the ability to do that because it has created the municipalities and has the ability to make those decisions and those changes, notwithstanding that they were done at an inopportune time. So all powers for a municipality come from the province. Municipalities have no inherent jurisdiction. They can't just do what they want to do. That's a really important fundamental principle. I want to take you back a little bit. In 2001, the province rewrote the Municipal Act. And that was the first time it had been rewritten in about 150 years. And under the old legislation, the pre-2001 legislation, there were a number of different types of municipalities. There were villages and townships and towns and small cities and big cities. And as the municipalities grew in size, they were given some more powers. So villages got the least and townships a bit more, and up it went. And the act even had population numbers in the to indicate how big a township had to be and how big a small town or a town and a small city had to be. All of that changed in 2001, and the province eliminated reference to the townships and towns and villages and cities, and replaced it with three kinds of municipalities. The first kind is a single-tier municipality. And by single-tier, we mean this, that there's no, they have all the responsibilities. There's not another level of government. All of Northern Ontario is single-tier, and there's some communities in Southern Ontario that are also single-tier. And here's the key. The province has given this bundle of powers to single-tier municipalities, and the same bundle has gone to all the single tiers. So it could be a township of 1,000 people or less, or it could be City of Ottawa. Each receive this same bundle of powers. That's a significant difference. It's really, really, really changed from what we knew and understood before. The other two kinds of municipalities are within a two-tier, what we call a two-tier system. And the first, the upper tier are the counties, and you're in a county system, or a region. And there are counties and regions throughout the province. There's one district, which is Muskoka. And these upper tier municipalities have within them geographically a number of local municipalities or area municipalities. We might know them as townships or towns, in some cases cities. The bundle of powers that came from the province, or that comes from the province, gets divvied up. And it's divvied up between the upper tier and the lower tier. Some of the powers are exclusive to one level or the other, some are shared. And the powers are divvied up in different ways in different parts of the province. So what's happening in your county can be very different than what's happening, for example, in Hastings County in Eastern Ontario. that was a huge change. That was significant in terms of how that was done. The other thing that happened is that the titles, the townships and the towns and the cities have taken on less importance. In fact, municipalities can change their title, their formal name, if they wish to do so. Some municipalities now go by the title or the formal name of Municipality of Ear Falls or Red Lake in northwestern Ontario. That's the official name. They don't have a township, they don't have a town. It's a municipality of, and there are a number of those spread across the province. You can't tell by the name anymore what the size of the municipality is. For example, in northwestern Ontario, there is a city, the city of Dryden, and it has a population. We have somebody online. Can we ask you to mute it, please? The city of Dryden is a city in northern Ontario, northwestern Ontario, with a population of about 8,500 people. Oakville is a town just west of Toronto, and its population exceeds now 200,000 people. So you can't tell by the name of the municipality how big it is. You have to look at the actual municipality itself. Section 5 of the Municipal Act was brand new and put into that new act in 2001. And it is, I think, the most important section in the Municipal Act. And it's really simple and it's short. And it says this: the powers of a municipality shall be exercised by council by bylaw. Now, the first key word that you have to read there is shall. And shall is mandatory. So powers of municipality shall be exercised by council by way of passing bylaws. Notice it doesn't say powers shall be exercised by members of council individually, but by this collective body called council that is exercising power, passing bylaws. And that's really fundamental. And we're going to see that principle carried out through much of what we're going to be speaking about tonight. So keep section 5 in mind as we go through this material. I talked about the complexity and technical aspects and how many different services municipalities provide. But I want to talk about for just a minute how this power, how municipalities exercise this power. And we know that it has to be by council by way of passing a bylaw or enacting a bylaw. And I refer to the meetings at which it has to happen as duly constituted meetings. It's the term I use for it. And the first principle is that the municipality has to give notice. You have to tell the public if you're going to hold a meeting, whether it's a council meeting, a regular one or a special one, a committee meeting. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter if it's an open meeting, a meeting open to the public, or a meeting that's closed to the public and where the public is not entitled to attend. So telling the public, telling the community is one clear example of transparency, the ability of the public to be aware in advance that a meeting was going to be held. And when we talk about this notice, it's not just saying there's a meeting at this date, but there's going to be there the agenda with all the various items that are having been placed on that agenda for deliberation by council. What matters will council be asked to deliberate and make a decision on? So notice is the first principle. The second principle is that the meeting has to be open to the public. Council cannot pass bylaws, cannot exercise power at a closed meeting. It must be open to the public. And it doesn't matter if it's a Zoom meeting or if it's live, if people are attending. The public has the right to be there. And that's a really fundamental principle. Look, the courts have said that the primary purpose of the public at a council meeting is to observe, is to be able to see how decisions are made and policy is set. Really fundamental to our whole system of democracy at the local level. The next principle is there must be a quorum. Quorum means a majority of the members. So I tend to work with a council of 5 people because it just makes it simple. Councils can be much larger than that in size, but if it's a council of 5, quorum for a council of 5, the majority is 3. So at least 3 members have to be present in order to conduct a meeting. So 3 or 4 or 5 are there, quorum is present, the meeting can take place. The next principle is that decisions are made based on a majority vote. And the majority vote is a majority of those present. So if you have all 5, 3 must vote in favor of it. If only 3 are there, we know that's quorum. 2 must vote in favor of it in order for it to be passed. So that's the next principle. The majority prevails at the end of the day. The final principle is that all members vote, and that includes the head of council. They are given a vote, and in my experience, they need to be exercising that. So these are the principles that go into a duly constituted meeting, and a duly constituted meeting is one where council can pass bylaws, exercise power, and can pass resolutions to take certain steps as well. Really fundamental. I said at the outset that councils in Ontario and municipal government generally in Ontario is the most accountable and transparent level of government. And I really believe that's true. For years, and I haven't checked recently, but for years there was a provision on the provincial website that said decisions coming out of cabinet were confidential and the public was not entitled to have access to them. It's very different than in local government, where decisions have to be made and policy powers have to be exercised in a public setting. But there is an ability, and I want to go through some accountability and transparency examples. And I want to start with open meetings, and clearly that's demonstrates both transparency and accountability. But there is an ability for councils and committees of council to hold closed meetings. Closed meetings are meetings where the public is excluded, and there are a number of rules that really make that situation transparent as well. And I wanted to just take you through it really, really quickly. The first principle is that closed meetings can only be held for a specific series of subject matters. And those are set out in the Municipal Act, and a council or a committee may only go into a closed meeting to deliberate an item that fits within the subject matters contained within the Act. So fundamentally, there's a control over the type of issues that can be dealt with at closed meetings, and there are no exceptions. The next principle, I think, that demonstrates transparency is that in order for a council or a committee to move into a closed meeting, it must pass a resolution in public. That resolution says 2 things. Firstly, that there's going to be a closed meeting. And secondly, this is the subject matter, the general nature of the matter that's going to be dealt with. And it could be, there can be more than one item, but that resolution authorizes the closed meeting only for those subject matters identified in the resolution. Council cannot deal with any other topic while it's in a closed meeting. The third thing is that the province also sets out in the Act what types of votes can be taken at a closed meeting. And it's detailed in the legislation. And if you're elected to council, staff and part of orientation will be to discuss with you what you can do at closed meetings and what's appropriate. There is an ability since 2008 to have a meeting that's purported to be closed, but improperly so, to be challenged. And that's every municipality has a closed meeting investigator. And I mentioned at the beginning, that's something that I did for a number of years, whereby complaints would be taken, investigated, and a report delivered to the council as to whether the alleged meeting, improper meeting, was an appropriate one or not. There are other examples of accountable and transparent government, and you can see the list of council policies. These are policies that are adopted by bylaw. The council, they're not intended to be dust collectors or put in place and forgotten about. They are active policies that are there all the time. I want to mention two of them very quickly. The first is there's a policy called Accountability and Transparency Policy. And it is intended to indicate or demonstrate how your municipality is attempting to ensure that it is both accountable and transparent. You should look at that policy. If you're thinking of running for council, I encourage you to take a look at that policy so that you have an understanding of the ways that your local government is being accountable in its decision-making and how it is being transparent. So that's the one. You should be able to find it on your municipality's website. Take a look. It's a useful one to read through. The other policy I wanted to mention, you'll see the two at the bottom of the page. They're both relatively recent. Pregnancy and parental leave deals with members of council, but the one I wanted to mention to you is there is a requirement now for every municipality, and by the way, there are 444 municipalities in the province. Every municipality will have a council member staff policy. Notice it doesn't say council staff policy. This is an individual council member policy in relation to staff. And it ties in to the code of conduct. So it's setting out what is appropriate conduct as between council members and staff. It's relatively new, and it's there because the province believes that there has to be some controls in place in terms of the relationship between council and staff. I talked at the beginning about the importance of who's responsible for doing what within the municipal organization. And again, because this is municipalities are in effect creatures of the province has set out job descriptions in the Municipal Act. And this is how we know what the responsibilities of council are, head of council, and I'll talk about what that term means in a minute, and staff. And the provinces, I think, made it very clear who is responsible for what within your organization. And so I'd like to spend a bit of time going through this, because I think if you're considering running for council, you have to have a real sense of what you're elected to do and some of the responsibilities that come with the office. So let's start with council. Council is like a board of directors of a corporation. In fact, it is. Municipalities are corporations. They're municipal corporations. They're not business corporations. And we know by Section 5 that council exercises corporate powers on behalf of the municipality. That's important. The Act goes on to say that council represents the public. No surprise there either. I mean, members of the public are going to be talking to you, communicating with you as members of council. And the expectation is you're going to be bringing the concerns and ideas of your community to the council table. So it's an important role. This representation is an important role as part of the responsibilities of members of council. The Act goes on to say that council has to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. And I think municipality has a dual meaning here. I think firstly, it means the geographical boundaries, your community. Obligation to consider the well-being and interests of your community. And that's important. And I think that's why you're listening to the public and you're hearing what the public has to say on issues. But it also means well-being and interests of the municipal corporation. Council members have a duty to act in the best interests of the municipal corporation. And that's imposed by legislation, but it's also contractual. Policies of insurance that municipalities carry that protect not only the corporation, but individuals within the organization. Those policies require that not only members of council, but staff act in the best interests of the municipality itself, the municipal corporation. So it's a fundamental principle, and we see it enunciated in a couple of different ways, contractually and legislative as well. I've covered the next point, acting collectively, this body acting collectively, making decisions, setting policy, and you do it with the public present, and you have an obligation as a council to tell in advance that you're going to be meeting and what you're going to be meeting about. There's nothing in the Act, Municipal Act, there's nothing in any Act that gives any management role or responsibility to council or to members of council. So if you're thinking of running for council because you want to direct work, how work is done by municipal employees, that's not your job. It's not your responsibility, and it's inappropriate. Your responsibility as a member is to be setting policy and making decisions on behalf of the municipality. It's important to, I think, keep that in mind and to reflect on it as you think about whether to run or not. Part of the orientation, and every council goes through orientation after the election, and a lot of time goes into getting ready for that orientation by staff and others. One of the subject matters will be the powers, individual powers for members of council, and there are some limitations, and that's the time that those powers will be dealt with, as I say, as part of that orientation. So that's council. That's council's role. It represents the public. The expectation is that you will be considering the best interests of your community and the corporation, and that you're the policy maker, you're decision maker. I want to move to the head of council. And I want to go back to pre-2001 again. And pre-2001, the Act, Municipal Act, talked about mayors and reeves and wardens and chairs, and each identified a specific type of municipality. So reeves, for example, were the head of council for townships and for villages, mayors for towns and cities, wardens were the head of the council, the county council, the office of warden, and chairs for regional council. Those terms in the legislation disappeared in 2001. And what is there now is the head of council. And the term head of council is, the responsibilities are set out, and they are the same now, whether you are the head of council for a lower tier municipality or an upper tier municipality, a region or a county. The ability now for municipalities to change the title for their head of council is given to municipalities by them being able to pass a bylaw to change it. Renfrew County, back 10 years, maybe 12 years ago, decided that and there are a number of townships in Renfrew County, they decided they did not want to have reeves as the head of council. They would rather call the head of council the mayor. And so they all collectively got together and said, we'll make this decision, and they did. And so bylaws were passed in each of the townships that changed the title of the head of council to mayor from Reeve. There's one municipality in the province that has a Lord Mayor, and only one, and that's Niagara-on-the-Lake. And interestingly, it obtained that authority by a special member's bill to the province of Ontario back in, I think it was the 70s, but it may have been the 80s. Today, municipal council could change the title of its head of council to another name if it wished to do so. Subject to, I think, the Reeve to mayor, there really hasn't been any change. The head of counties has continued to be the warden, similarly the chair for regional councils. So all of the duties and responsibilities, whether it's an upper tier council or a lower tier, are all the same. And the first principle is that heads of council preside over council meetings. That sounds like, well, that makes sense. The one exception, and there is just one exception in the province, is the City of Toronto. The City of Toronto, when Mayor Mel Lastman was mayor, Mayor Lastman had difficulties chairing council meetings. And frankly, I don't blame them. Council meetings in Toronto last for 3 days. And he convinced the province that Toronto should be able to have special legislation or special ability to have the mayor appoint someone else to chair the council meetings. And that's the case. That does not exist anywhere else in the province. So the fundamental principle is that the head of council presides over council meetings. The act, though, is much more detailed than what I've just put on this bullet point on the slide. It says that to preside over council meetings so that they are efficient and effectively run. And that means heads of council need to be good at chairing meetings. They need to understand some of the principles. It's really different, I can tell you, sitting in the chair of the meeting than it is sitting in the chair of a councillor. It's a very different view of the world, different responsibilities that come with it. So presiding over council meetings in an efficient and effective way needs training. And most heads of council do get some training around the role that they are required to fulfill. The next proviso is that the head of council provides leadership to council. Makes sense? Notice it doesn't say to the municipality, to the municipal organization, but it provides for leadership to the council itself. And we'll see in a moment that the leadership on the staff side, the administrative side, rests with the chief administrative officer. Head of council speaks on behalf of the municipality. That isn't there for councillors. There's no authority from the province to do that. So how does the head of council know what to speak on behalf of the municipality? Well, council speaks by way of passing bylaws and resolutions. So the head of council has an obligation to speak with respect to the matters that council has dealt with and made decisions on. The last bullet point just deals with some of this leadership responsibility that goes with leadership to council. And you can see some of the things that the head of council has to provide advice and information on a number of different subject matters. And I've just listed these as an example. One of the controversies back in 2001, it really came to a head in 2006. Historically, the head of council in Ontario, the mayor, the reeve, the warden, whomever, was designated as the chief executive officer, the CEO of the municipality. Now, if you're from a business background, you know that the chief executive officer is the person responsible for the day-to-day management of the organization. The debate that occurred throughout the municipal sector back then was one group saying the province should get rid of the title. It's confusing. And another group saying, yes, it's confusing, but the province needs to define what it means. And the province chose the latter. It chose to define what it means to be, for the mayor or the head of council to be the chief executive officer. And it set out a series of bullet points in the legislation. And if you read those bullet points together, if you read them through, it's clear that the head of council, as the CEO, does not have day-to-day management responsibilities, but is in fact the champion of the municipality and is to be perceived as the champion of the municipality. Some mayors that I've known over the years are tremendous examples of that. The one I often mention is former Mayor Hazel McCallion, who was no question the champion or the cheerleader for the city of Mississauga. The day-to-day responsibilities rests not with the mayor as CEO, but with the chief administrative officer. Now, that person could be called the chief administrative officer, or it could be the administrator or town manager or city manager. There are a number of different titles. As long as they have the responsibilities set out in the Municipal Act for that office, they take on the lead role. Lead in being the senior administrator, lead being the primary advisor to council. It's an important position, and if you're thinking of running for council, I encourage you to, if you've got some issues around policy, you may want to have a chat with the chief administrative officer of your municipality in advance of the election. I want to mention one other staff person, and I'll mention others briefly as well. The other one I wanted to mention is the clerk, the municipal clerk. Municipal clerks are appointed by bylaw, as is the CAO, by the way. And when they are appointed to that office, they receive a number of duties and responsibilities from the province. And in effect, they have a job description given to them by the province, in addition to their job description by the municipality itself. So if you think of the clerk's role, clerk's responsible for the running the election, chief returning officer, and clearly that's someone you may want to talk to in terms of when this is going on, this whole process is unfolding and the election approaches. But the clerks have a number of other responsibility, and there's a series of different statutes that become significant. Their responsibility for the meetings and putting agendas together and the meeting rules. Clerks are the experts on rules of procedure for council and for committees. So if you have any questions around not only election issues, but anything relating to procedural issues, the clerk is the person to talk to. As I say, they are the expert on meetings. Council will look to the clerk regularly for advice if there's an issue that needs some determination, or some council needs some guidance in making a decision. So let's flip over to the staff side, the administration of the municipality. And I like this section of the Municipal Act. This is a summary of it. And I think it's really well written. The first thing it says is that staff have an obligation to undertake research and provide advice to council. Well, what is that? Well, those are the reports that staff write to council, and those reports contain a recommendation. Usually it should be in the form of a motion. So staff have this duty to do the research, provide advice to council, and council has an obligation to receive it. That makes staff, the way the province has set it up, the primary source of information for council. When the agendas are put together and the reports are all there and they get circulated to the public, council will hold the meeting, will make decisions. most of which will be supportive of the advice given by staff. Not always. Occasionally, council will go in a different direction, and that's okay. That's fine. That will happen from time to time. Once council makes a decision, staff have an obligation to implement that decision. And that's really where the work starts to get done. Once council makes the decision, staff have an obligation to implement it. There's a provision in the Act that says staff have to establish some policies and practices. These are not council policies. These are how you run your department policies. And I had a number of them in the legal department. Clerks have a whole bunch, Treasury, Parks and Rec, Public Works, all have basically how you do the work, procedural manuals and how you do the work. Why do they have those? Well, the Act says they have those in order to carry out council's decisions. Again, we see this divide, if you will, between the council as the decision-making body and staff as the body that undertakes and provides the work. I've used this slide or a similar one for years, and I debate all the time whether to keep it in, but I do because I think the image is really good. Council should steer the boat rather than row it. Council decides on the services, does that as part of the budget, and then leaves to staff as to how to deliver those services. It's a quote from a book from, I think in the 70s, called Reinventing Government by Osborne and Gabler. I'm not sure if the book's even available anymore, but the image of council steering this municipal boat, if you will, is a good one to keep in mind. I want to spend a few minutes talking about governance, municipal governance, because I think it's important to talk about how council makes decisions. It's really important, it's really fundamental, and it's going to be part of your job in a significant way if you are elected to your local council. We know that the primary source of information for council is the staff and the advice staff provides in the written reports and recommendations. And that's significant. And again, the province has structured the legislation that way. Another source of information for council and advice is the committee structure. And there are all kinds of committee structures, variations in municipalities right across the province. There are some municipalities that have no committees. Council, and these are usually small communities in Northern Ontario, council has said, we don't need committees, we can get the work done. We're getting the advice from staff and we'd rather move things through as quickly as we can. So why does council create committees? What's the purpose of having a committee? Well, at the end of the day, the purpose is to provide advice to council and make recommendations. Committees can look into issues in more detail and provide some advice back to council. Council, when it creates committees, sets the mandate for the committee. Committees don't set their own mandate. Council populates the committee, puts members on it, and may even appoint a chair. Committees don't make decisions. Committees make recommendations. And again, it's one more source of information coming to council to allow council to make a determination. The public has this role, and I've mentioned that the public's role is to observe. Primary role is to observe. But there are occasions when the public wants to speak to council, and council will have, within its procedure bylaw, a process for delegations to come and speak to council. Council controls the process, and so it should. The public can come forward, and council may have them come forward to committees, or they may have them come forward to council. The principle that I've always worked on is a member of the public, a delegation, we call them, or a deputation, should only be heard either at committee or council, but not both. Again, they're providing advice and an opinion to council they are asking council to adopt and accept. I talked about local boards and their impact and how they interrelate with council. They can have an impact on how decisions are made as well. But they are, as I said before, independent bodies that have this link to the municipality, and that link differs for each one of the local boards. If you're on a run for council, you better love meetings. I mean, you better really love meetings because you're going to spend a lot of your life going forward in meetings. The next 4 years are going to be filled with meetings on a regular basis. Sure, you'll have a couple of council meetings a month. You may even have special council meeting from time to time, but you'll be attending committee meetings that you've been appointed to. You may be on a local board, the library board, for example, and you may be on other agencies within your community. You better love meetings, and you better get good at it. Because if you don't get good at it, you're going to get really, really frustrated. People that understand how to perform effectively at meetings and what it takes make a huge difference, both for their community and for their own self-assurance and confidence that they're bringing forward to it. It's a skill. And part of the orientation after election is to talk about what makes for successful meetings and what makes for successful members of council at those meetings. So if you're thinking of running for council, you better love meetings because you're going to spend a lot of time in them. I always describe the procedure bylaw as one of the two most important documents in the municipality. The other is the annual budget, because it sets your policies for the upcoming year and in fact into the future, your capital budget. But your procedure bylaw does so many things. It contains the rules for your meetings, rules of procedure, what's appropriate, and council gets to set those rules. There are some that are set by the province, but generally speaking, council gets to set the rules, and they're contained within the procedure bylaw. But it does so much more. It sets the governance model, the committee structure that you have. It sets the rules around the public attending and being able to speak to council. It defines the relationship at meetings between members of council and the head of council, between council members and the public, between council and staff. It plays a really significant role. And one of the suggestions I'm going to make to you tonight is that if you're thinking of running for council, go read it and read it through and get a sense of what it's about, because that's going to be the governing document that will impact how meetings are conducted, what the structure is going to look like, and how council deals with people who are, if you will, acting inappropriately in meetings. There are rules that are set out in procedure bylaws. Interestingly, I said earlier that often I get calls and requests to come and talk to councils and staff about roles and responsibilities. The other area I get called is around procedures and meetings. And before I talk to the municipality about what the problems are, I read the procedure bylaw. And I can tell what the problem is usually without talking to anyone. They're built in into the procedure bylaw. It allows for difficulty between council members or between council and staff or council and the public. It's a really important document, and I encourage you to read it if you're thinking of running for council. Members, in my experience, who know the rules will do very well at council. They'll be more effective than people who don't and don't pay attention to them. So it's election night. Results have come in and you've won. And that's pretty exciting, and you're convinced at that particular point in time that everybody loves you. They don't, won't last long. But your life will change from that minute on. Even before you take office, your life will change. People will want to talk to you differently. People will treat you differently. Some people who've never talked to you in your life will want to talk to you about issues that are going on. People will see you as a community leader. And in your community, you are a member of council 24/7. And you can't lose that. The public won't allow you to lose it. It's really significant. It's really important. Well, they may pay you as a part-time position, but trust me, you are 24/7 for the next 4 years. And it requires on your part a total commitment. And in my experience, that commitment is there. People are committed to doing it. Interestingly, it tends to consume people. You'll wake up in the middle of the night and you'll be thinking about issues around your local municipality and decisions council has to make or has made. It consumes everybody, council members, staff. It's fascinating. I've made a habit of talking to people who've left the municipality, either employees who have gone elsewhere or council members who are no longer on council. And I talk to them 6 months to a year after they've left, and I ask them if their life's changed. And the consistent comment I get is, it's hard to believe how much it consumes you. It takes all your time. It takes a huge amount of time and effort and energy in your life to fulfill the requirements from people who are contacting you, people who are in touch with you, and some other things that I'll come to in a minute. I put the last bullet point, 2-tier in, to tell a story, and I've told it in some municipalities. I told it this afternoon. Let me tell it tonight because I think it's an important one. This is about 10, 12 years ago, a session similar to this, but one of the people at the session was a former mayor and of an township in Eastern Ontario. And he told this story. He said, you know, I was on council, I was a member of council, a councillor, and I decided to run for mayor of the township. And the results came in that night, and I won. He said, I won. And I was pretty excited, and he went home and he went in the house and he said to his wife, I won. I'm the mayor of the township and I'm on county council. And he was pretty excited, and his 8-year-old son came in the room and he said the same thing. I won, I'm the mayor and I'm on county council. And his 8-year-old, in a moment of complete wisdom, looked at him and said, well, I guess I lost. And the mayor said, the former mayor said, that was an impactful moment in his life. He realized that he was going to take on these responsibilities, but he could not abandon the importance of his family commitments. And I think that's true. I think it's an important point to make. And I think it's a conversation you have to have with your significant other if you're thinking of running for council. You will be getting calls. You'll be on social media. People will interact with you, but they'll also interact with your family members. They're going to hear from the public. If you make a decision as a council that's not a popular one, you will hear from the public in various circumstances, and so will your spouse. I made the mistake one day when I was in Sudbury of dropping off some papers. Well, that wasn't the mistake. On a Saturday morning with him to a member of council. And he was a gentleman who represented the Italian part of Sudbury and just a wonderful community. But he said, I got to go to the grocery store. You got to come with me. Come on with me. And I said, well, okay, sure. So we went to 3 grocery stores, bought one item in each, and spent 4 hours. And he was there not to buy anything, although he did buy one item in each, but he was there to talk to everybody. And he did. And he loved it. He was in his element, and it was really a great thing. I learned never to drop papers off on a Saturday morning to a member of council who wanted to get out and meet the public. That was one of his ways of doing that. It's really important. So he kept in touch with people using that sort of a process. I said to you earlier that if you want to be on council, you better love meetings. And that's true. But you also better love reading. I mean, you better really love reading, because you are going to be inundated with this never-ending flow of paper, whether it's paper form or on a computer or whatever. It doesn't stop. It comes every week and it's relentless. And it takes a lot of time to read all the documentation. I made a comment the other night that in Sudbury, we were up to almost 170 pages for the city council agenda every 2 weeks. And I had someone say, oh, gee, we'd love to get it down to that number. Ours is closer to 400 pages. Here's the important thing. You need to read every single page. And you do that for 2 reasons. First is, you've made a promise to be effective as a member of council. That means you need to be prepared for meetings. We know how important meetings are. That's where the decisions are made. So you need to read every page to be prepared for the meetings. And if you don't, you could find yourself in a bit of an embarrassing situation if you were to ask a question where the answer to the question is found in the 3rd paragraph on the 1st page. But there's another reason you have to read it, and that is to protect yourself. You have obligations as a member of council under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and you need to be aware if there are conflicts buried in those documents, in those reports somewhere on a matter that council is going to give consideration to. You need to ensure that you are prepared and that you have reviewed all that documentation to make sure that as to whether you have a pecuniary interest in a particular matter. Prep time takes a lot of time. Councillors in Sudbury, when I was there, used Sunday afternoons and evenings to prepare, and they had to prepare for both city council and regional council. They had a lot of reading to do. That takes time away from your family too. And you need to factor that in when you're looking at the commitment that this job requires and takes. Meetings have a lot of issues that go with it, and prep time and reading time is a significant amount that you have to take into account. This is kind of a placeholder slide to get us to some other issues. I talked about council members not directing work. That gets referred to in our municipal sector as micromanaging. If you are micromanaging as a member of council staff, you are, I think, having a huge negative impact on your organization. Remember that policy, the staff council member policy, your code of conduct. There are a whole series of steps now that you can find yourself into some difficulty. But beyond that difficulty, it just has such a negative impact on people within your organization. You're not there to micromanage. You're there to make high-level decisions and set policy. Incivility's been around a long time. It's coming out in some municipalities in a significant way, and it's costing the municipalities a lot of money. There's one in Northern Ontario that in the last 3 years, they've spent close to $500,000 on integrity commissioners and lawyers. They could well use that money to fund roads projects or other infrastructure projects. Part of the training you will receive as a member of council, part of the orientation, will deal with this issue of uncivil conduct and treating people in an appropriate way. Confidentiality I'll deal with in a few minutes. I want to just make a couple of points on it that I think are important. And then let's talk about some personal responsibilities, because they become significant, I think, when you take on a role of member of council. And I want to start with codes of conduct. Up until just a few years ago, a few municipalities had codes of conduct, and they all looked different, and they had integrity commissioners whose responsibility it was to investigate alleged breaches of the code. The province changed that, and they said codes of conduct are mandatory now for members of council and local boards and committees, and so is the fact that every municipality must have an integrity commissioner. And the role of investigations continued, but the integrity commissioner was given responsibilities around educating members of council and the public, and providing a service which is a really interesting one, and that is if a member of council writes to an integrity commissioner and asks for an opinion, the integrity commissioner must respond in writing. So it can be a real assistance to members of council to help them determine what's an appropriate course of action around the code of conduct or municipal conflict of interest act. It's a significant, I think, step forward, and it provides some relief to members of council who aren't sure exactly what they should be doing in a given circumstance. The IC, the Integrity Commissioner, also now has responsibilities under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. This act came into effect in 1972, and it came into effect to allow members of council who had businesses in the community who wanted to supply goods or services to the municipality, but were prohibited from doing so. This act allowed them to participate or to bid, but it set up rules around what a member had to do if they had what is called a pecuniary interest. It's a personal obligation. It flows to the member. It's not a staff obligation. And in fact, members of council, the courts have said very clearly, cannot be asking staff to provide specific advice on this. Their remedy now is to go to the Integrity Commissioner. Pecuniary interest means financial. Pecuniary means financial. And there are a number of types of pecuniary interest. There's direct ones. So if I own Fred's Widget Shop on Main Street, and I want to bid for a contract for widgets for the municipality, and it's going to council, when that item comes up at the very beginning of the council meeting, there's an item there asking for declarations. I would say, Your Worship, I want to declare a pecuniary interest on item 4 because I own Fred's Widget Shop. The clerk will take that down and record it in the minutes, and it will be there. But there are other kinds of pecuniary interest other than direct. These can involve family, they can involve employer-employee, they can be partnerships, they can involve being an officer or shareholder of certain types of companies, they can involve being members or officers of various organizations within your community. There are a lot of different types of pecuniary interest, and you need to be watching for them. Remember I said you had to read all of that paper? There can be a pecuniary interest buried in there that may not be direct to you, but it may be indirect, and it becomes yours. So I said that historically, since 72, you've had to declare the pecuniary interest at the beginning of the meeting. That has been changed by the additional requirement now of not only the verbal declaration, but you must now, as a member, file it in writing with the clerk at the time of the meeting. And the clerk will take that verbal declaration and the written declaration and put them into a registry. And that registry is available to the public. Wouldn't surprise me, people in the next few months will look pretty closely at who's been declaring pecuniary interests, and maybe more interestingly, who hasn't on a particular matter. The Act goes on to say that if you have a pecuniary interest and you've declared it, you've done that properly, you can't participate in the deliberation when that item comes up, and you can't vote on it. The Act also says that you cannot influence, and influence means other members of council or staff, and influence means any time before, during, or any time after, not just at the meeting itself, but any time before, during, or after. So you really need to be paying attention to the obligations of finding pecuniary interest and being aware that they're there. It's really important. It's really significant. Up until not too long ago, the province in the Act said that if someone believed that a member of council had breached the Act, their remedy was to make an application to court at their own expense. Frankly, that reduced the number of claims under this legislation. It was restricted to electors. That's now changed. It's broader than just electors, and the complaint now can go to the Integrity Commissioner, so that the complainant isn't looking at paying the costs of a court application on their own. And the IC will investigate, and the IC, if he or she believes it appropriate, can apply to court. The court has a considerable range, going all the way from a reprimand up to removing a member of council from the council and keeping them off council for up to 7 years. The impact of allowing people to complain to the Integrity Commissioner as opposed to applying to court has meant that the number of complaints across the province is up, not surprising. Interestingly, the costs of that complaint process, the costs are borne by the municipality. So some municipalities are facing a considerable amount in the amount that it's being paid out to investigate these alleged breaches. Excuse me. There is a book, and if you're thinking of running for council, you may want to get yourself a copy. You can get it. It's published by Municipal World, and you can go to the Municipal World website. The book is called Ontario's Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, a handbook. This one was published in 2019. The cost at the time was less than $30. It takes all of the sections of the Act, and it takes all of the cases reported to that time and breaks them down. I've had, interestingly, a couple of people talk to me who said that they're running for council because they own some land and they want to get it developed, and they figured they have a better chance of getting it developed if they're on the inside than if they're on the outside. And after I spoke to them, they realized that that's not going to work. And they got the book, and both of these people contacted me and said they're not running for council because they would be stymied in terms of dealing with their own application. The Act would come into play and prohibit it. Very quickly, on confidentiality, I think it's important to understand that as a member of council, you're a community leader. And as such, you carry around with you, whether it's in your head or on paper or on a device, a lot of confidential information. And it's important that you understand that it is confidential, that you have no authority to breach that confidence. In fact, one of the topics that is required to be covered in the Code of Conduct for members of council is confidentiality. The province has considered it important to do. You have to be aware, and you have to give thought to conversations you're having. Am I entitled to tell this fact to someone who's not part of the municipality? And that can be someone at the coffee shop or on the internet. It can be family. You need to be really cautious about indicating something or putting something in writing that is confidential and could have significant impacts if that information were to be released to the public in an inappropriate way. Just mention again that if you are a councillor, you do not speak for the municipality. We talked about that earlier. It's important. I want to just talk about water just for a few minutes, because I think it's important to understand that the responsibilities that come with being a member of council are significant. And they are significant in that they can be found in highly regulated and technical pieces of legislation. We all remember Walkerton, and the province's response to Walkerton was a statute called the Safe Drinking Water Act 2002. That act at the time was considered perhaps one of the very best safe drinking water pieces of legislation in the world. It was really significant in what it did. The province brought that act into effect, but it didn't bring a section in that imposed personal liability on decision makers within the organization. We know who the decision makers are, that's members of council. In this context, it also means senior staff and your chief water operating officer. So nobody paid much attention to this personal liability because it wasn't there for a decade. But in the summer of 2012, at the Association of Municipalities Conference, the province announced that this section, this personal liability section, was coming into effect on January 1, 2013. And it did. So the municipal sector was scrambling to determine what training members of council had to receive to meet the requirements in the legislation. Walkerton Clean Water Centre offered training, AMO offered training. I had the opportunity of delivering that training over a number of months. And it's important that members of council understand what their role is and how they meet the personal responsibilities found in the Act. The penalties in that Act are substantial, both in relation to the corporation, the municipal corporation, but also individually. So members needed to be trained, and new members of council, the new council will have to be trained as well come this after the election this year, to understand how they fulfill the mandate that is placed upon them by the province under this legislation. This is a matter of health and safety. It's important, but it's one example, I think, of regulation that is imposed upon members in some very complex and technical areas, and water is certainly one of them. There are others within the municipality as well. So let's wrap it up. Understand the role you've been elected to fulfill, and you need to know your role, what you're there to do, but you also need to understand and have a respect for the role that other people within the organization are playing and outside the organization as well. Understanding the responsibilities that come with this position is critical, and it's the starting point. I talked about municipal powers resting with council, not with individual members of council. That kind of sets the tone for everything you're doing. Council members, you're not being elected to manage the organization, you're being elected as the setting policy and decision makers. And management stays on the staff side. Understand and get the training on your personal obligations. Understand your obligations under things like the Code of Conduct. You'll be trained on it. Conflict of interest, you should be trained on that. I think running for council is a family decision. I think you need to have a chat with your family about it, what's involved, and the amount of time that it takes, and the commitment that it takes, and the fact that it will indeed consume everything and your time going forward over the full 4 years. And people in your community expect you to talk to you and converse with you. Finally, whether you run or not, congratulations for even considering running for council. I think it's a significant way to give back to your community. It makes a difference. And as I said before, the characteristics I look for are integrity and a vision for your community. And I think if you bring that to the table, or those to the table, you're going to be very successful as a member of council. So why don't we bring this part to a close. We'll take the slides and make